I can never say this enough. Just be kind towards everybody and everybody's struggles. Maybe their struggles are different than yours. Maybe you feel like this person is so much more privileged than you, but they still have their problems, and that doesn't give you a free card to be unkind towards their struggle. So just be like, I know that this is hard. I know this is so difficult, and I'm so proud of you that you're going through this. I'm so proud of you that you started this, that you're doing this, and I believe that you can carry on. And let me know whatever I can do for you, if I can give you my support, or maybe just listen to them. Listen to them talking about that it's hard and it's difficult and they feel like giving up, and just give them even a few bits of motivation or validation, and never ever disregard someone's hardships just because maybe you in your mind think, or maybe factually you have gone through more difficulties in your life, but that doesn't mean that you get to discard someone else's difficulties and hardships. So just be kind and just be understanding that it is hard for them. Maybe, and sometimes it can be like maybe this thing wasn't even hard for someone, but it is hard for somebody else. And in that case, even you don't get to say that, hey, that wasn't that hard for me, so I don't understand why you were being like this. It's not that difficult. but, but it's not that difficult for you. Okay, everybody is different and everybody has different experience, and we do not have to exactly understand or go through the same experience to be empathetic towards someone or be kind towards someone. We just need to know that we have to be kind and we have to be supportive, especially to our friends. And so many of these motivators try to give you like tough love kind of talks, but sometimes, or a lot of the times, you just don't need that. Not in a motivational video. I don't think tough love should be in a motivational video. If that works for some people, well, good for them, but not for a lot of other people. Don't think that since I am giving this whole speech about do not give up, that I don't give up. This is essentially the reason I'm making this episode, because I am the biggest giver up ever. I I give up so easily. I have given up on a lot of things in my life, and let me tell you, the regret of giving up is much worse than all the difficulty that or anything that was coming between me and those things. The regret is such a heavy thing to carry for the rest of our lives. So, when I was first having the idea of this podcast, like this particular podcast, because it's been a long time coming, to be honest. Not this one, but like a podcast. I wrote down all these ideas for potential future episodes, and I had written down a title, The Art of Giving Up and Dying. I mean, because of the anime reference, but obviously I was gonna talk about not giving up. I didn't know what the second episode was gonna be, but I didn't think I was gonna be talking about this. As I went into the Rooftop Club podcast project, so much happened. Like, I didn't think it was gonna be just so easy, but I didn't predict this many problems, as many as I did come across, and I was so ready to just give up on this podcast at so many steps. But I kept reminding myself, do you remember that you have written down an idea to talk about in the podcast about not giving up? So please apply that to yourself. Like, what are you gonna talk to people about if you do not have even one example where you did not give up? So please just keep going on. Also, I feel like this is a sidetrack, that when you are planning for a project, when the early phases of something is like the honeymoon period, and you feel so creative and so inspired and you have so many ideas coming in your mind, please write those down like in detail, because it is inevitable that a dry spell would come eventually, and a creative block would come. And at that time, all the planning that you had done before, all these ideas that you had written down before, you can use them. You don't have to cook up a new idea, and you don't have to use your blocked creativity because you already have done some homework for this time. You have done some planning. Use that energy to build up something for future. So it's not like a few months ago or like a few weeks ago that I had this idea to make a podcast. It's been a long time coming. Not like this whole plan, but I wanted to have a podcast for so long, like 6, no, 7 maybe, I guess. Years ago, I had the idea to make a podcast and I really wanted to do that. And even before that, I feel like when I was like a child, we used to have these long drives from our city to wherever my relatives were living, and we did a lot of traveling. We still do, and we usually do that at nighttime. So I would sit by the window side in the car at night looking at the stars while a radio show is on in the background, and I would listen to it with like the vibes. And I really love that feeling of listening to the radio, looking out at the night sky, and in a car, on a road, under the stars. Wow, wow, I really just recreated that. You see, dreams take a lot of brewing. So, well, that's that. But me and my best friend used to talk on voice messages a lot. Like, we used to send each other such long voice messages on philosophies and our theories on different things. You know how that meme goes, that listening to my besties voice messages like it's a podcast. We literally used to do that. I don't know how, if I used the term podcast, if I even knew that at that time, but essentially whatever. So I talked to her and I was like, hey, we talk so much on these messages, and I feel like our talks are so fruitful and so full of wisdom that we should make a podcast about it, and we should talk about all these topics that we talk about, but also make a podcast about it, and release that for the world to see because we're so wise. Oh my god. But at that time my friend was like, no, I don't think we should do that. We're still figuring things out, and we should do that once we know everything and we have figured it out. But I was like, no, but that's gonna be the beauty of our show, because we're gonna figure things out together with our audience, and it's gonna be so fun and interactive, and we can grow together. But she wasn't really up for that, and I'm not really that persuasive, so I dropped the idea. But it never left my mind. But since that day, I've always wanted to have a podcast, and it is only now recently that I was like, I can do this on my own, and I should totally do this, and I have time right now, sort of. And I was like, okay, let's do that. Remember how in the beginning I was saying the moon is so bright and it's not a red moon, blah blah blah? And red moon is not even that common, and now the moon is red. I'm sorry, I was loving you being so white. I was just amazed by you being so white, but now why are you so red? The moon is like red. It's a red moon now. Wow, it really is red. And a little scary, and it's a lot dark again. Okay, so back to the story of Rooftop Club podcast. When I first came upon the idea of the podcast, I was very sure that I wanted it to be a rooftop podcast, and I guess the name Rooftop Club was one of the first things that came to my mind. So I started working from there, and the first step was to understand how a podcast even works, how what podcast even is. I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts, but I don't really know the behind the scenes. So the first step was researching, and I could have just watched a few videos and read about it some, and that would have been enough. But no, I get into hyperfixation mode, and I had to keep researching about it I cannot even tell you the hours and hours of research that I did on how podcasts work, what all these different terminologies are, and learning about all the different apps and softwares. I think at the very first step, I overexerted myself with all the research that I did, and when you have so many options and it was so confusing what to choose, what to do, I could have just understood the few things and carried on, but I didn't do that. Because sometimes I'm just like, hey, if someone comes up to me and asks me about what RSS feed is and what is this and that, and I'm gonna have a podcast, I should be able to explain it to just anyone. I should be so knowledgeable about this topic that I'm just like an encyclopedia. I have to become an encyclopedia about this because I'm doing this and I have to. That's just like how my brain works, and that I should have all the information in the world about a thing that I am doing. I don't know where this all comes from. Anyways, so I overstimulated myself, overwhelmed myself with all the research, and I was like, whoa, no, I cannot do this. This is too much. I didn't expect it to be this much. And no, I shouldn't do this. Stop. And at that time, I was ready to just not do it. I was like, maybe, this whole podcast thing for so many years in my mind was one of the examples of, how we sometimes like the idea of something and not that thing actually, and maybe it was just that for me. It's not really for me, etc., etc. And I was so doubtful after all my research that maybe I just shouldn't do this. But since it was the first step of me wanting to give up, so I just talked myself out of it. I was like, no, no, we're gonna do this. But I was still excited about it. So I was like, no, 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 I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna figure this out. Okay. And there was another factor that helped that I'm gonna talk about later. Anyways, now I decided what I was gonna do, how I was gonna make my podcast, and it was time to record. And I you can find me talking to myself in the middle of the night in my room when I am alone, or if I'm not talking, I have these well formed monologues going on in my mind, like with words and sentences, not just like electromagnetic waves. And in front of my bathroom mirror, I can win any argument that I essentially lost before. But as soon as I plugged in a microphone and held that in my hand and pressed record, I just couldn't talk. I was stuttering. There were so many cuts. I couldn't really speak. Even though I had planned out the whole episode in bullet points and I had that sheet in front of me, I was just so bad at talking. But still, it took me like two or no, not two, 3 hours, I guess. But I recorded the first episode and I went downstairs and I listened to it. It was really bad. I was really unhappy with that. I was like, oh no, maybe you can just speak alone. You can only win arguments in front of a mirror with your own reflection. That's all you can do. That's all the speaking you can do. All the words that you can say so perfectly in your life suddenly become a tongue twister for you when you're speaking in a microphone, and you just suck. I was just really talking down to myself and I was so doubtful and insecure, and I couldn't even listen to that recording because it was so bad. Oh my god, I do not know what is going on with the moon. It's literally a crimson red moon. Anyways, and after that first recording I was again just ready to give up.